want to introduce you now to our first speaker that's going to talk the first half of the program. I'm very excited to have him here with us. He's one of my favorite lecturers. He's got a tremendous style of being down-to-earth and friendly and very inclusive. I know you're going to enjoy him. He's very knowledgeable on many subjects. Saeed Khan is currently in the Department of History and lecturer in the Department of Near East and Asian Studies at Wayne State University, where he teaches Islamic and Middle East history, politics, and culture, and where he is also a fellow at the Center for the Study of Citizenship. His primary area of research is the identity politics of Muslim diaspora communities in the US, the UK, and Europe. He's a contributor to several media agencies, including C-SPAN, NPR, Voice of America, National Press Club. He's a consultant on Islamic and Middle East affairs for the BBC and the CBC. He's a co-host of the radio show on WDET, which you hear probably regularly, called Detroit Today. And we're very thrilled to have him here to speak with us. So let's welcome Saeed Khan.
First of all, thank you all for being here this afternoon. I really want to extend my appreciation to OneHamtramck and really my dear friend Bill. Bill puts out the, as you probably already know, he puts up the bat signal, and how can you not say yes to Bill? So thank you for hopefully a topic that will educate you, inform you, and perhaps even put you into action, because particularly on the issue of the Rohingya, it is nothing short of a crime against humanity. So, well, Bill has told me that this is a brand new computer, so he's actually doing real well with that. So, I really enjoyed the opening video. I thought it was really informative regarding the geography and the touch on the history of Bangladesh. And so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to go ahead and do a bit of a deeper dive, because in order to understand Bangladesh today, and particularly in the region where it finds itself, with neighbors both hostile and not, ones who are now friendly, in fact maybe they weren't so in the past, it's important to see the challenges that this small and surprisingly important country has to face. Thank you. So this is the flag of Pakistan, as you saw in the opening video, and of course Bangladesh has its origins in Pakistan, and before that in India. Next, please. During the partition of India and the independence of India from Britain in 1947, and I think it's important to recognize that while Bangladesh itself gained its independence from Pakistan in 1971, it gained its independence as part of Pakistan in 1947, and so in some ways it's actually 70 years old, not just 46. And it was a country that comes about because of not just geography, but also because of demography. The plan was to try to create areas of independence where there was a majority of Muslims in India. The problem was there was a majority in 3 different locations. Now the 2 that we are most familiar with are of course on either side of India, in the west as well as in the east. But there was another area in south central India called Hyderabad, which was a princely state. And in fact the ruler of Hyderabad, the Nizam, was at one time the world's richest man, but unfortunately, since it was surrounded by India, it didn't really have the luxury, and quite frankly, it didn't really have the desire to leave its own independence. In fact, it was swallowed up by India on September the 12th, 1948, despite its very earnest efforts to maintain its own sovereignty and independence. But nonetheless, Pakistan comes about tragically with a lot of, how can we put this in a very parliamentary way? With a lot of luggage. Because of the last Viceroy of India, Lord Mountbatten, who had a certain inclination toward the Indian leadership, including the soon-to-be Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. he had, along with that, huge issues with the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. When Pakistan is created, it splits up the provinces that are located along the border. So Punjab, Sindh, and the Bengal are split right in half. This causes one of the greatest transfers of population in history, and one that was wrought with a tremendous level of misery as well as death. Now, if we look at early Pakistan, and we see how this landmass, this sovereign country, which is separated by 1,000 miles, with a hostile country in between. In the United States, we do have 2 states which are not part of the other 48. We have Hawaii and we have Alaska, but Canada is a friendly nation. So the ability to go back and forth between the United States and the contiguous states and Alaska is really not that far of a stretch to do. Imagine being able to do that when here you have countries that are actually rather hostile. Back in 1951, which was the first year that Pakistan had its census, there was a population of 75 million. Just to give you the updated numbers, the city of Karachi alone right now is about 25 million people. The full population of Pakistan is somewhere around 182 million. In Bangladesh, it's around 160 million. And of course, you have in India a population of roughly about 1.2 million. So for those of you who are doing some math, you realize that essentially 1.5 billion people live within the Indian subcontinent, or somewhere around 20% of the world's population. Most statisticians believe that by the end of this century, we're looking at a total population of the Indian subcontinent of about 2 billion people, which will put it somewhere around 1/4 of all of humanity. There's also, as you notice in Hamtramck and other places, a South Asian diaspora. So if we add the numbers in not just the United States and Canada, but in the UK, East Africa, Southeast Asia, and Australia, you're looking at probably somewhere in the lines of several million more people that are there. Now, as far as how the population was split at the time, the majority of the population in Pakistan was in East Pakistan, or what today is Bangladesh. The religion, interestingly enough, at that time was not categorically Muslim. There was still, and there still is, a Hindu community that lives in both sides, but the overwhelming majority of the Hindu population in what used to be one Pakistan was on the East Pakistani side. Literacy rates also favored the Bengali side of the equation. The government was and still is in both countries a federal republic, and you notice that back then the GDP was around 43 billion, or somewhere around $573 per capita. We're not talking, of course, of a very large amount of money. That probably is a monthly revenue for Apple computers. Now, what were the challenges facing Pakistan upon its inception? As I mentioned before, it is a non-contiguous country with a hostile nation in between. There was also an asymmetric level of power distribution in the country, despite the fact that the majority of the population was on the East Pakistan side. You had the banking and the finance sectors all loaded heavily in West Pakistan, which is where the capital city of Karachi was, later to become Rawalpindi, and after that, Islamabad. Now, one of the big areas of industry located in East Pakistan is jute processing, which, as you saw in the early video, is within the textile field. The problem, though, was that most of the jute processing may have occurred in East Pakistan, but the owners of those processing happened to be on the West Pakistan side of the border. There was also very little agency for East Pakistanis within the local provincial administrative structure of East Pakistan. So in places like Dhaka, in places like Chittagong, most of the bureaucrats came from West Pakistan, which of course creates two problems. One is that there aren't any sense of local enfranchisement with the population, But also, you've got people who didn't necessarily have the cultural or the social literacy about East Pakistan, but yet they felt as though they were in a position to know better. Perhaps one of the biggest tragedies about Pakistan and what then ensues into the splitting of Pakistan into Pakistan and Bangladesh has to do with language. And this, of course, is ironic on several levels. What happens with Pakistan, as you see, is, on the one hand, an overwhelming majority of the population speaking one language, which is Bengali. And this is happening in East Pakistan. It's pretty much categorical over there. Not too many people in East Pakistan speak the other languages of Pakistan, and quite frankly, vice versa. Yet on the West Pakistani side of the border, you've got quite a bit of diversity. You've got Urdu, which is the language of migrants from India to West Pakistan. You have Punjabi, which is the second most pervasive language, followed by Sindhi, and then Balochi and Pashto. The problem was that the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, himself a migrant, and one who was certainly not that well versed in Urdu, decided to essentially accede to a lot of the money that was migrating to Pakistan, a lot of industrialists and all, for whom their mother tongue was Urdu, by declaring Urdu to essentially be the official language of Pakistan. Now, the language of commerce and the language of government was English, but to go ahead and declare a language which was only spoken by 8% of the population was clearly going to upset quite a few people. Why they decided not to go ahead and name all of these as official languages, I'm really not sure, but at the very least, I guess one could say that there would be a logistical nightmare of having paperwork in every single one of these languages. But yet, it would have been much more practical to go ahead and do so. The other irony is, and I remember when I was a kid and I would go to Karachi, as a disclosure, I was born in Karachi before the splitting of the country. I was 4 when that happened, and you can do the math. But I remember going to Karachi, and when, as a little kid, when TV was on, back then there was only one channel, and it was black and white, and it would start at, I think, 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening and run till midnight. Very, very limited television. This was in the 70s. They would show the news for a half hour, but the news wasn't a full half hour. It was 5-minute segments. And the news would be broadcast for 5 minutes in English, 5 minutes in Urdu, 5 minutes in Sindhi, 5 minutes in Balochi, 5 minutes in Pashto, and 5 minutes in Punjabi. That seems to be giving a de facto recognition of the fact that it is a very linguistically diverse country. But the problem was that for half of the population, actually a little bit more than half of the population, their language was simply dismissed. Now, this in and of itself would be problematic, except it's also important to recognize that Bengali is a very poetic, it is a very lyrical language, and it is something that is central to Bengali identity. So to go ahead and essentially blow off a language is going to have political implications along with just sociological ones. The other problem was that there became a kind of a culturally asymmetric relationship. Unlike Pashto, unlike Sindhi, unlike Balochi, unlike Punjabi, and unlike Urdu, the script or the alphabet of Bengali was different. While the other languages were all based on the Arabic or the Persian alphabet, Bengali uses, of course, the Devanagari or the Sanskrit script. This then created, unfortunately, a cultural prejudice that also was part of the language issue. People in West Pakistan started to see in a very condescending way that Bengali as a language was inferior, or even worse, was subversive, maybe even treasonous, because it used the alphabet of their hostile and adversary neighbor, India. So these then formulate an entire construction about the East Pakistani or the Bengali people that permeates not just language, but also permeates culture, and even aspersions of saying that they're not really Muslim, they are in fact essentially quasi or real Hindu. So when these constructions build up over the next 24 years, it really then is a runaway train heading for an inevitable collision course. This is Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan. He was the leader of one of the prominent members of the Quit India movement. In fact, he was doing it before Gandhi ever got back to India from South Africa. For some of you, you've probably seen the movie where Gandhi gets off the boat in 1916. Jinnah was actually already one of the main advocates for home rule and had been so for quite a while before some of these younger people came on the scene. Later on, Jinnah moves from being much more secular-minded to taking on a more, and I'll use the phrase, Muslimi tone to his political rhetoric, essentially to match or go toe-to-toe with Gandhi's use of Hindu imagery when it came to the civil disobedience movement. When he felt that some of Gandhi's protégés like Nehru and Patel were moving toward a more Hinduized India post-independence, he started to advocate for an independent Pakistan, which would then be a home to, if not all, certainly a good number of the territory's Muslim population. He then becomes the first ruler of Pakistan in 1947 after independence. In fact, he becomes the first governor general. The problem was that he was addled with illness. He had lung cancer and emphysema, and dies 13 months after the independence of Pakistan, ironically enough on September the 11th of 1948. He is succeeded by Liaquat Ali Khan, like Jinnah, a British-educated barrister or lawyer. The problem was that Liaquat Ali Khan was the first casualty of political tension. There were people within the country who wished that he would take a more strident posture against India. In fact, they wanted him to wage war against India. He refused, and he was assassinated. Now, what's interesting is that he was succeeded by a Bengali. Contrary to what a lot of people might think, the Bengalis were not kept out of the political process within the early stages of Pakistan. Next, please. This is Khwaja Nizamuddin, who becomes Prime Minister after Liaquat Ali Khan. He is a member of the Pakistan Muslim League. And so what we find then here is in the early stages, we have people from East Pakistan as well as from West Pakistan who were part of the same political enfranchisement. Right here, we don't find then that ethnicity or province superseded what were the political orientations and priorities of people. He becomes the Governor General, and then after that he becomes the Prime Minister. So that provides a lot of prestige. The fact that he succeeds the founder of Pakistan, Jinnah, to become the first Governor General, and then succeeds Liaquat Ali Khan to become the second Prime Minister. The problem was that he was removed from office by the new Governor General in 1953 because he failed to do something decisive enough to quell Bengali demands for more political autonomy. One of the issues that was occurring at the time, and I'm sure that actually we have no frame of reference about this, 1,000 miles apart is not an easy way to govern a province. Today, with technology and telecommunications, of course, it's instantaneous. Back then, it was much more of a challenge for East Pakistan to get its administrative marching orders from West Pakistan. The Bengalis were asking for more political autonomy, more ability to go ahead and make decisions instead of having to check in with Karachi all the time. It would be much more efficient, it would be much more expedient, but because West Pakistan was really holding the purse strings and the budget, and because it wanted to centralize control, that really didn't happen. That is something that Nizamuddin was at the forefront of trying to prevent happen, except it was not seen as good enough by the Governor General, who outranked him, and he had him removed. But he was replaced by another person from the Bengal, and this is Muhammad Ali Bogra, who serves from 1953 to 1955. As you notice, he was also from the Pakistan Muslim League. He is remembered for having a very strong tilt toward the United States. And I think it's important to recognize that as much turmoil and tension has occurred in the rather sad history toward the division of Pakistan and the independence of Bangladesh, a lot of this has to be seen within the crucible of the Cold War. There were a lot bigger forces that were afoot at this point, and the United States had made it a point of making Pakistan part of its Central Asian strategy. In fact, in 1955, under the Eisenhower administration, Pakistan becomes a signatory to CENTO, the Central Nations Treaty Organization, which was essentially NATO but farther east. Along with Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Great Britain, the United States decided that this was the mutual defense pact it wanted to make in order to provide a girdle from southern Soviet expansion into the Persian Gulf and into the Arabian Sea. As a result of it, it would be no surprise for a Prime Minister of Pakistan to be leaning toward the United States, and certainly Pakistan was not interested in forming much of an alliance with the Soviet Union, and even if it wanted to, it couldn't, because the Soviet Union was quite tight with India, its mortal enemy. Unfortunately, Bogra was removed by, at the time, Governor General Iskandar Mirza. And Mirza, ironically enough, being a Bengali himself, was much more in it for his own personal political gain. And he then uses as the excuse regional issues to go ahead and undermine Bogra's rule. But Bogra was not completely removed from power. He was then simply moved over to become Pakistan's ambassador to the United States because he had very good relations with the Eisenhower administration. This is Hussein Shahid Suhrawardi, who also is a Bengali leader and becomes the prime minister, not immediately after Bogra was removed, but very soon after, just in fact a year later. Now this marks a real change within Pakistani politics, with a new political party coming online, the Awami League, which actually emanated from East Pakistan. Until this point, the major and dominant political party throughout Pakistani political life had been the Pakistan Muslim League, which was founded by the founder, Jinnah. So this really represents a major shift. Again, somebody who was leaning to the West. He is remembered very fondly in Pakistan as being the founder or the person who establishes the atomic energy program, not necessarily the nuclear weapons program, but the atomic energy program. But he is forced to resign when he runs afoul of Iskandar Mirza's political plan. See, Mirza was part of the Republican Party, and no jokes here, different Republican Party, but because the Awami League was actually working quite closely with the Pakistan Muslim League. Next. This is Iskandar Mirza. I figured I had to have a picture of him somewhere, who served as president from 1956 to 1958. He had been Governor General prior to that, and when he saw one of the political parties gaining too much at what he saw was his own ambitious intent, he decides to declare martial law. And this, of course, then sets a precedent, whereby the military becomes a major player in West Pakistani and now Pakistani politics. He was, ironically enough, then deposed by the very general that he put into power, Field Marshal Ayub Khan. He then goes to live in exile in London. Essentially, he dies a pauper. He just had his pension as a former military man. And when he dies of a heart attack in the 1960s, the Pakistanis refused to allow him to have a burial back in Pakistan. So the Shah of Iran, with whom he had very close ties, sends a jet to London to pick up his body, and he is then buried with full state ceremony in Tehran, Iran. Now, getting to the actual war on independence and what was the lead-up. It really comes down to not just a percolation of some tensions over culture and language, as well as ethnic marginalization, but really it is the 1970 elections which bring things to the fore. The Awami League wins the majority of seats in the Pakistani parliament, somewhere along the lines of about 167 out of 169 seats from East Pakistan, and clearly then a majority in the 313-seat body which is located on the west side of Pakistan in the new city of Islamabad. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the Bengali leader of the Awami League, now is eligible to go ahead and form his own government. This is what happens in a parliamentary system, and become the prime minister. Unfortunately, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who's a leader of the Pakistan People's Party, the scion of a feudal land-holding family in Sindh on the western side, he refuses to let Rahman become the prime minister. And in fact, what he then proposes, as former foreign minister himself, is to have a dual prime minister system, where you've got a prime minister for the west side of Pakistan, and you've got a prime minister for the eastern side of Pakistan. This would be similar to having a president for the red states and a president for the blue states. And some people, I think, probably wouldn't mind that, but that's a whole different lecture if Bill wants to invite me back for that. On March the 7th, 1971, justifiably incensed for this snub and breach of protocol and really the law, Rahman delivers a speech in which he calls for resistance to martial law, which had been declared by West Pakistan upon East Pakistan. He was not going to sign this agreement that Bhutto was proposing for a dual prime minister system, because this was seen in very Godfather-esque terms to be presented as an offer that he couldn't refuse. And this really then begins the independence movement. So we've got election problems. We also have an unresolved language issue. 30% is the Bengali-speaking population of Pakistan, and yet it is still not recognized as a federal language. On top of that, when it comes to the budget and spending for East Pakistan, despite the fact that the majority of the Pakistani population lives there, it receives only 40% of the national budget. And then, as I mentioned before, there is this issue of religio-culture. The fact that West Pakistan was condescending toward East Pakistan, seeing them as inferior because of the fact that they were, in fact, quote-unquote, because of alphabet and other issues, too Hindu for Pakistan. This is Nur al-Amin. And in 1971, West Pakistan decides that it's going to try to appease the situation regarding the tensions which have now really conflagrated into a civil war by appointing him as prime minister. He seems to be rather innocuous. He's part of the independent party. After Khan resigns as the military dictator, he is brought in to be the new prime minister. Unfortunately, Bhutto has become the new president, and according to the Pakistani political system, he has the ability to go ahead and manipulate the system. So he removes Nur al-Amin as prime minister and makes him vice president. And by the way, he still remains the only prime minister in Pakistani history. It was actually a position that didn't exist. Okay. Now, the war on independence, thanks to Mujibur Rahman's proclamation on March the 7th, gains momentum. But, of course, it is reached with a counter move by West Pakistan, and that is known as Operation Searchlight. The Pakistani military decides that it is going to, by force, take over all of the major cities in East Pakistan, and it is going to essentially eliminate all opposition there as well. It is estimated that somewhere between 1.5 and 3 million people are killed at the hands of the Pakistani military. It is considered in modern parlance to be tantamount to a genocide. On March the 26th of 1971, roughly 19 days after Mujib gives his declaration of resistance, there is the declaration of independence for Bangladesh. Immediately, Indira Gandhi, who is the Prime Minister of India and the daughter of the first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, recognizes Bangladesh and offers military support. Of course, her support for East Pakistan and for the severance of Pakistan was calculated because of her animosity toward Pakistan and essentially to be a disruptive force. The Indian military comes in and engages for 12 days and scores a very decisive victory over the Pakistani military, which surrenders on the 16th of December. This is Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who becomes then the first Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and serves also as president in 1975, but he is assassinated on August the 15th of 1975 by a renegade army officer coup. There is a certain irony that the coup occurs on August the 15th of 1975, because August the 15th is the Independence Day in India. Now, fast forward after a rather tumultuous period in Bangladeshi political history. Bangladesh has really been dominated over the last several years, really going back about 26 years, by two women who have been prime minister, essentially going back and forth. One, of course, is Khaleda Zia. She's the wife of former army chief Ziaur Rahman, who was also at one time president. She is a representative of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party and has faced her own challenges with being accused of corruption, mostly involving kickbacks with her son. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled that she could not be charged for any of the underlying corruption issues because Bangladesh was in the midst of emergency powers, or the invocation of emergency powers, and as such it called for the suspension of things that otherwise would be prosecutable. Now, a little bit of background regarding her husband. Her husband was an army chief, and there is a lot of suspicion that he in fact knew of the coup that occurred in 1975, which then not only deposed Mujibur Rahman, but killed all but two members of his family. So that is a specter that has always then loomed over not just Ziaur Rahman, but something that is also transferred onto his wife. Ziaur Rahman was assassinated in the early 1980s. The other, of course, is the current Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and this is, of course, Sheikh Hasina Wajid, who is the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And she is attached to her father's political party, the Awami League. She herself has not been immune to charges of grafting and extortion. In fact, she was also charged with arranging the hit on some of her political opponents. She was at one time temporarily barred from returning to Bangladesh, but that was lifted in a few years later. There's also, as the earlier video showed, with the Padma River, there was a bridge scandal involving contracts and corruption, which is something, of course, we know nothing about here in the United States, but it was also something which has plagued her reputation and her credibility and her political support within the country. So that gives you a very, very, very short synopsis of the history of Bangladesh till now. But one of the recent issues, which actually has been teeming for some time, is the plight of the Rohingya. Now, the Rohingya people are an Indo-Aryan ethnic group like many in the Indian subcontinent. They have been part of South Asia and South Asian culture for millennia. Now we hear about them because of their current situation there. But it's important to recognize again how external forces have fomented so much of the misery. A lot of this has to be seen in the context of British colonialism, which created boundaries artificially and created tensions and divisions among people artificially, oftentimes for the cynical reason so that the British could then extend their relevance and their presence there, arguing that they and they alone could go ahead and keep the peace, even though they were the ones who brought the violence and the division themselves. Now you see here that they are a group that migrated from the Bengal, during British rule, which lasted somewhere between 1824 and 1948. They were encouraged and enticed to go to what today is Burma for labor jobs, particularly when it came to agriculture as well as fishing, which was available there in the Bay of Bengal. Now, during World War II, Burma was under a tremendous level of tension. It was a British protectorate, but it was a territory that the Japanese had their eyes on. Now, the population of Burma was overwhelmingly Buddhist, and thus was aligned with the Japanese. But it was the Rohingya who still were aligned to the British. And also the fact was that the British made certain promises. They said that if and when the war ends, we will make sure that you, the Rohingya, will have a very prominent role within the future independent Burma, politically, economically, and all. This would not be the only time that the British lied when it came to their post-colonial exercises, but they did, and essentially they left Burma, they left India very quickly in 1947, 1948, and the Rohingya were essentially left to the mercy and the devices of the overwhelmingly Buddhist population. The Buddhists didn't take that very well, and in fact decided that they were going to exact revenge upon the Rohingya for what they saw was their disloyalty to Burma and their inclination to the British. One of the things that happens with the Burma or the Burmese regime is in 1982, when the laws for the country, especially nationality, are revamped. Burma has 135 different recognized ethnic groups. The Rohingya were not one of them. As a result, they were denied and deprived citizenship, so they were denied voting rights, which I suppose doesn't really matter when Burma then became a military junta. But more importantly than that, they also were subject to complete marginalization and statelessness. Without having citizenship, notwithstanding voting rights, they were not regarded to be Burmese. And in fact, while they were isolated in the coastal enclave of Rakhine, they were even denied the ability to leave their province without first getting permission from Yangon, the capital of Burma. Which brings us to the current refugee crisis. For the Rohingya, who have been persecuted, marginalized, discriminated against now for decades, we find that it is an ongoing process of finding space and finding refuge wherever they can. But this has really come to a head over the last 2 years. And part of this has to do with the fact that the trope of terrorism as it is being deployed has then given and emboldened countries to be able to then find their Muslim minority populations and to make the claim, as erroneous and as false as it might be, that these groups pose a terrorist threat. And as a result of this use of the T word, it then gave the Burmese government, as well as their allies within civil society, particularly hardline Buddhists, the empowerment to then begin what are called clearance operations in Rakhine, to go after the Rohingya population. Now, on the one hand, it is invoking security, it is invoking counter-extremism, but it seems as though a major element for why this is happening isn't necessarily about religion, is not necessarily about ethnicity, it has to do with geography. The fact that the Rakhine is a strategically very critical area in Burma because of how much coastline it occupies, and the potential that is there for striking deals with China in order to develop deep water ports along the Burmese coast. So keep that in mind. But here we find that since the 1970s, there has been an enormous displacement of the Rohingya population. As much as 890,000 in Bangladesh, 350,000 in Pakistan, 120,000 in Malaysia. The Saudis took in 200,000, 10,000 in the UAE, 5,000 in Thailand, 40,000 in India, 1,000 in Indonesia, and as well as 120,000 that were internally displaced. While all of the refugee coverage was occurring in the Mediterranean, dealing with people from sub-Saharan Africa as well as from Syria, it is important to recognize that there was a tremendous level of similar misery of refugees trying to leave both Bangladesh as well as Burma. And many drowned in Southeast Asia as a result of it. And today in Australia, we find that there is a massive debate going on regarding the refugee issue. The Australians have very successfully been inspired by our policies regarding Guantanamo Bay, whereby we can essentially offshore asylees and refugee applicants so that we do not have to grant them certain due process rights were they to actually make it to our shores. So in the case of Australia, they're doing this in places like Papua New Guinea and in Fiji. We find that in the current ethnic cleansing that is going on in Rohingya, upwards of 40,000 to 50,000 people have been killed. At least as many have been raped and even tortured. If you want the most recent update, of course, this is about 48 hours old. There has been an agreement that has been brokered and settled between Bangladesh and Myanmar or Burma, whereby Bangladesh is going to repatriate 400,000 Rohingya refugees to Myanmar. The analysis of this deal is wrought with a lot of skepticism and actually quite a bit of anger regarding whether it in fact even is legal according to international convention. Because number one, it does not resolve the status of the Rohingya people, whether they are going to be sent back and are going to still be considered stateless, whether they are still going to be regarded as non-citizens. There are no guarantees or assurances for either humanitarian relief or whether they will not face persecution when they get there. This is still an open question, and I invite you to stay tuned as this development moves forward. With that, I will take any questions.
Hopefully I didn't miss anything and this is irrelevant or something, but you mentioned the Burmese junta, and I know that there's been, I suppose they've had an interesting history recently, and haven't they been through a little bit of political upheaval? And I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit and talk about how perhaps this genocide started and maybe resulted from that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, the Burmese military junta has been in power for several decades. In fact, it unseated Aung San, who was an advocate for democracy, the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel laureate. The junta is still in effect in place, but there's this veneer on the outside which includes Aung San Suu Kyi. There is the conceit among the military junta that it suits them fine to have her out there as the public figure and the public face of Myanmar. She is, after all, an Oxford-educated Nobel laureate. She has been, until very recently, the beneficiary of an unblemished level of support and adulation around the world. But you see the kind of Faustian deal that's at play between the junta and Aung San Suu Kyi. She has, of course, been very notorious in her silence, and in fact has echoed the party line, so to speak, when it comes to the junta, of saying that the Rohingya may be extremists or that there are extremist elements. That is what we are focused on, to the point of naked denial that there is any misery or ethnic cleansing afoot. So I think it's important to see then how these two forces are working with one another. And the fact that they know that Suu Kyi can go ahead and not only provide them with legitimacy, but the equally important fact that she can hold a Burmese civil society at bay for them. So.
Hi, so I am Bangladeshi American, And when talking about the Rohingya refugee crisis in my community, I'm not really sure if it's fortunate or unfortunate, or it just is. We speak about the Rohingya refugee crisis with a lot of animosity, because given that 350,000 or so refugees were displaced to Pakistan, a lot of the Rohingya that we speak of or have been talked about speak Urdu. And to us, given that the refugees were displaced during the time of our independence, a lot of folks in my community, including my family, speak about the Rohingya as traitors. And we were the ones that received the most of the refugees as they were being displaced, and yet the Rohingya that we interact with today, and we see in the news a lot of them, especially my dad will say, no, those are the Urdu-speaking Rohingya. Like they were the ones that helped rape and murder our people in the millions. So what are your thoughts on that, and is there legitimacy to that, or yeah?
Thank you for the question. It, I think, highlights just the incredible complexity of this. It also, I think, highlights the other very important factor in this, is that nobody forgets history. And so the fact that people will go ahead and talk about a generation which was not even the glint in the eye of the grandparents who, in fact, perpetrated some of the genocide or the ethnic cleansing during the war speaks volumes. I mean, the very fact that we're talking about the independence of Bangladesh, which occurred 46 years ago, which is 2 generations, and we're talking about children, and we're talking about other young people who are facing the kind of misery that they are, shows you that the history of the subcontinent and all of its various manifestations, going back to the time of British colonialism, post-colonialism, and then, of course, this period of 46 years, 44 years, which culminates in the independence of Bangladesh. This is still raw. And it is therefore ironic that some of the same divisive issues which led to the independence of Bangladesh, including the language divisions, are being invoked today to go ahead and talk about a refugee population and whether or not they deserve to be given humanitarian support and relief. It's beyond my ability to go ahead and be indignant knowing that there are families who were destroyed or at least severely damaged during any of this history. Like I said, I came into this movie relatively late. I was 4 years old when the independence movement happened. I remember being in England, and I remember my dad being fixated on BBC, listening to the reports of Dhaka falling, Chittagong falling, and I remember things at 4 years of age. I'm sorry, it's one of my quirks. But it's some of the earliest memories that I have of hearing this. And one of the things I do as a historian is oral histories. Hearing the trauma of people from that generation, I'm not surprised that that's something to which you're privy.
Let's have a nice round of applause for Dr. Saeed Khan. Thank you so much. Great. You do know from you folks who live in Hamtramck here that the Bangladesh community is very large. It's probably the largest or second largest in Hamtramck. So we're the folks who here, and especially the Bangladeshis, know a lot about the history of Bangladesh, but this was a great background to set us up for this discussion. The second half is going to be about the Rohingya crisis. And we have with us 3 organizations who have offered to help out with this program and co-sponsored: the Alliance of South Asian American Labor, American Muslim Political Action Committee, and the Galapganj Helping Hands USA organization. There's 2 people we're going to bring up, and this is MD Alam and Nayeem Choudhury. Let's please give them a nice welcome, and they're going to take the second half.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful evening. You know, just give one more hand to Dr. Saeed, please. And I really appreciate that OneHamtramck, especially with Bill Meyer and all these people who came out. I just want to run through the slideshow, but before I go there, I just have to remind you a few things. Stop Rohingya Genocides in Myanmar. It's a movement in the United States of America by ASAAL, which is Alliance of South Asian American Labor. Once again, you can go to sprint.com/Rohingya. The front page, you will find the donation online. Next slide, please. So, basically, as Bill already said, that these are the people that what we are trying to bring in coalition to make some awareness and let you know what happened in Alliance of South Asian American Labor. We have American Muslim Political Action Committee, MPAC, Gulab Ganj Helping Hand, USA, and OneHamtramck. Next slide, please. So these are the people actually who was involved in this process to bring you together, and also in the future we're going to be doing a lot more. So I like to thank Bill again, ASM Kamal Rahman, one of the community leader from Bangladesh, Yusuf Kamal Choudhury, he was here, Misbah Choudhury, council member Ian Prata is here, who joined with us on two of our event. Thank you so much. Also Dr. Saeed, thank you so much, and each and everybody who are sitting here and joined this evening. It is a great that you are trying to get some information. Make sure you will spread this message to the people out there. Your voice will be mattered in this process. So this come to the point that what we are trying to accomplish, get the voice, make people aware that what happening. American media never ever taken any leadership to give the voice for Rohingya people. At this point, I like to invite Ibrahim Aljahim to the front to give a few words to this gathering. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Almost evening. Well, call your elected officials, the congressmen, the senators, call the White House. Just put pressure on them. As American citizens, we owe those people. People all over the world that need help. We have the power to stop anything that's going on over there. So please, call your elected officials and say a few words to them. Maybe they'll listen. God bless you and God bless America.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim Aljahim. Ibrahim Aljahim is our political director for the Alliance of South Asian American Labor. We're trying to do what is needed as a community at large. And all the participation and partnership is very important, and we are seeking for partnership and participation. At this point, I'd like to invite our Vice President of ASAAL, Imam Arif Huskic. Imam Arif Huskic, please welcome Imam Arif Huskic.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon to all of you. As you heard from Dr. Saeed Khan, I really appreciate, Doctor, your presentation. This is for me very educational presentation, and I'd like you to take it more seriously we can and follow up with this. Brother Alam, thank you so much for taking action on this, and I really appreciate Bill Meyer and his team, OneHamtramck LLC, for sponsoring this event, and we will continue to give you support, and all of you proceed together and tell your places at worship, tell your imams, tell your pastors, tell your rabbis about this situation. This is a human issue. This is not only Muslim issue. Tomorrow will be Christian issue, will be Jewish issue, we don't know. But we are in a tough situation that we all need to stand up for each other and look for each other as Jesus teaches us. Look for neighbor as you want him, look for you, or love him as you want to be loved. My brothers, Ibrahim Aljahim mentioned media, politicians, those departments, to contact them, follow it. Brother Alam mentioned media. I am more with the religious leaders and religious communities, but I work with them closely, and I will work and support this from my aspects wherever I can reach to. I ask you to support it too. Donate to the ASAAL's website, as you see that Alam also asked you. So please support. This is supporting yourself, supporting your children. They are now in Hamtramck or Detroit, but children are in Rohingya as well, as was in Bosnia 20 and something years ago, in Yemen currently, in Rohingya. That goes from place to place in the world. We need to stand up, find peaceful solution how we can end this cleanliness. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Imam Arif Huskic. You know, every single effort we can provide, it will be appreciated. They need it. Imagine that. There's no food, there's no good shelter, there is no clothing, there is no water. The basic human needs, they're not there. Still they're trying to survive. They escape from the deadliest attack, and still they're out there. So we, as a human community, on society, on generation, on race, we need to put our helping hands. We need to put our support. And at this point, before Mr. Nayeem Choudhury come to the front, I'd like to bring Mr. Muhiuth Mahmood. He is the president of Gulabganj Helping Hand USA also. He is the executive vice president of ASAAL Alliance of South Asian American Labor. Please give a hand to Mr. Muhiuth Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Alam. I really appreciate everyone's coming in here. Bill Meyer, there's a great event that you organized. I appreciate it. Brother Saeed, your presentation was outstanding. It's really good, informative for all of us. A lot of things that I don't even aware of. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here for a reason, but it's not a good reason. We all know, we all feel it, and we all have heard, and it's hurting our feelings that what's happening to the Rohingya. This can be happens to our future generation. It can be happens to anyone in the world. So we all need to keep pressure on our politicians, not only USA, all over the world. They need to step up. They need to step up and finish this. It's not a game. We can play a game with the human being. We can play a game with whatever we want, but this is a human being. They have a right to live in this world. The kids has same right that all of us, my kids living in USA, and this kid, they all have the same right in this world. So we have to make their life comfortable. I know this winter coming, we're all getting ready for the winter. The same thing happening there. They have a winter too. They're feeling cold. They have no food. They have not a standard living. That's not even a basic living over there. So ladies and gentlemen, I know you all here for an evening. As I say, I'm very happy to see all of you here. And I'm very appreciative that Mr. Milbar, Mr. Alam, and everybody else, we all together organize this event. Please put your helping hand forward and how we can help. Only financial helps, that's good. It's great to help them financially, but that's not enough. This situation needs to solve. It has to be end somewhere. And we can't have them hanging out there for forever. So we all need to keep pressure on all politicians, even every leader for the whole world. I'm asking everyone, please move forward and finish up the humanitarian issue. God bless everyone. God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muhiuth Mahmood. At this point, I'd like to invite and introduce Mr. Nayeem Choudhury. He is the organizing director of ASAAL Alliance of South Asian American Labor, Michigan State. Please give a hand to Mr. Nayeem Choudhury.
Thank you, MD Alam. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, first and foremost to Hamtramck LLC for gathering everybody here this evening. This is a great evening. Everyone's looking very great, and thank you for joining us here. I'm just going to talk about just a few things about Rohingya. The Rohingyas, as you heard, that they've been genocide in their Arkan city where they were living before. The populations of Rohingyas, approximately 1.5 million, they fled to Bangladesh and other countries. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk about the slides as you can read everything. The Rohingyas are one of the most unfairly treated people in the world. Language is Rohingya, Bengali, Arkansas, religion Islam. Next slide, please. As you can see, that picture tells you everything. You know, I don't need to tell you more about it. They have been under extreme hardship by the Burmese government. They have yet to recognize by the government. Instead, they have labeled as a non-citizen. The Burmese junta have discriminated against the Rohingyas because they don't have similar looks, language, and religions. What are the problems Rohingyas are? The Burmese government endorsed the Burmese culture and Buddhist faith for their national citizen, and results in destruction of the Rohingyas Muslim. As means of clamping down on Rohingyas, the junta have restricted even the most basic of rights such as education, marriage, and citizenship. As you can see how the media portrays everything, you know, it's looking at the pictures. Rakhine looks like is attacking Rohingyas, and media portrays the other ways. This is very important that media how plays and tells the stories on the medias. So folks, that you need to research and do other researches to find out how things are in Bangladesh and Rohingyas. Next thing is between 1978 and 1992, approximately 200,000 Rohingyas left Burma. Most of them moved to southern Bangladesh, where they have remained as refugees. In Bangladesh, the Rohingyas are faced with hardly any protection from their host country, their own country. They've been living here there for hundreds of years, Rohingyas, southeast of Bangladesh. Okay, so this slide tells you how we can help them. Okay, that's better. Raise the Rohingya people issue in your local communities, mosques, churches, and other faith institutions and gatherings. Contribute to media outlets, including social networks, in particular the interfaith networks. Seek to meet with members from the Rohingya communities in order to learn from them directly. Lobby your local city and state officials and bring local and state community pressure on them about the Rohingyas people issue. So as you heard me, that this is how we can get involved and let your voice heard and help the humanitarian issues to stop the genocide and crisis around the world. Our help, it will, anytime in any formal way you get involved, it will help the humanitarian crisis. The next one's the references, side references that you can go and find out more about it, as you see that Wikipedia, Google, and Algeria, and other sites. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nayeem Choudhury. I hope that information helped you guys out and understanding the Rohingyas and the refugees that are fleeing into Bangladesh. That's quite heartbreaking. You know, they don't have shelters, food, basic needs, basic cleanings, medical aids. There are a group of people out there helping, but we need more helps out there. Most of them are living under the sky, on the ground, you know, under the trees. So get yours help. Go to the sites that MD Alam have mentioned, and other websites that would give people a little bit more shelters, more financially or medical needs. So please do your condolence or do your supports. Thank you so much, Hamtramck LLC, to being here, and Gulapunj Helping Hands, and ASAAL, everyone. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
People on the ground in Cox's Bazar getting information toward a future war crimes trial, which, you know, could be 10 years down the road, but that does send a message to the military perhaps. But also, I was just curious if you're aware, or anyone else is aware of some specific, say, legislation to perhaps enhance support to Bangladesh for their own, they're obviously dealing with a terrible refugee crisis, And any other advice you got, like say we can be pressuring, writing letters to the Indian government, the U.S. Embassy here, so we're concerned because India is not. There any like you were saying China has also been silent.
I mean, the last time, as up to last Thursday, they still been silent.
Okay, so that would be something we could just sort of send letters to say, look, we're concerned. What are you going to do? Can you help? Whatever. Anything on the U.S. side? Anything pending in the
U.S.
in Congress or anything? They've been good.
Congress already actually passed a resolution to go ahead and do whatever is needed, and based on that, also the Secretary of State and Security Council, they're trying to connect with the United Nations Security Council. So they're putting pressure on it to stop. So
have they cut down on support to the Burmese military?
We haven't had any updates up to like last week, but still U.S. taking a good role to stop it.
Thank you. So anything we can do.
Any other question? Yes.
Well, I'm just echoing that. I'm wondering if and when. If we write to senators, congressmen, things like that, what specifically do we ask them to do? Because it sounds like they've taken some action already, and I'm wondering if locally, are there Rohingya families that have been that are refugees in Hamtramck, and how do we perhaps sponsor and support them?
Great question. How we can locally do something, or if we do write letters to our congressman or senator, what do you do? The United States Congress actually already have the resolution. Every single congressman and senator, they know about it because it was a floor discussion, open discussion. So they all are very welcoming and they're trying to work with it. So what we are doing as an organization, we're trying to also reach out those elected officials. And we are asking to partner if there is any event going on. They come, people get more information. We write the letters as simple as it is. Please stop the genocides in Burma. Whatever is needed, stop the military operation in Burma. Whatever is needed that the U.S. Congress, the senator and congressman, definitely they make the difference. They also put pressure on the big presidential cabinet to come up with a big resolution. That was a great question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Ghulam Nawaz. I'm also a faculty at Wayne State in engineering. I think this question is directed to you, Dr. Saeed. I think we see clearly there's all the evidences of ethnic cleansing, and a lot of fantastic researchers and scholars have called this slow genocide. It hasn't happened overnight, but for many years, I think this process is going on. So we are at this stage. What really behooves me is, although there is geopolitics and there are issues about our current U.S. government, how much of voice they will raise. There are some senators working very hard. There are people maybe like Tillerson, it took a long time to say that, this is the situation. But why is this issue not being raised in the United Nations Security Council as an impending problem that requires resolution? Because if UNSC provides a resolution to stop it, then the entire nations can put together some kind of effort to make this thing stop. So there are issues about little sanctions here, something else there, and so on. Even the Bangladesh government, what it is doing now, we don't know whether it's right, because United Nations has already said that it is not clear if this is going to, if these people are ready to go back to Burma. So my question to you is, what do you think is happening? Why is this issue not coming up to United Nations Security Council?
Great, thank you so much for the question. Well, the simple reason why it's not coming up is because none of the countries really want to bring it up. This is not high priority for them. I mean, I know this is a really very depressing thing to say, but let's take a look at who's involved and what are the dynamics, particularly with the current administration here. Tillerson, you're right, it takes him a long time to finally get to the point of saying that this is ethnic cleansing. But Tillerson may not be the person who's really running American foreign policy or being the best representative of the diplomatic corps. First of all, the State Department has essentially been gutted of most of the kinds of experts and analysts who would not only have the knowledge about what's been going on, and as even the question was raised before, understanding the complexities of these histories that go back generations. So those people are now no longer in the White House, or sorry, in the State Department. The budget is being decimated. And then you also have the inability for people to make policy recommendations based on that. There's just simply not anybody there. On top of that, I think the question is not so much what Tillerson can do about it, but what Nikki Haley can do about it, who is the U.S. ambassador at the United Nations. It's really her responsibility because, from what I understand, it's a very schizophrenic diplomatic corps right now with the Trump administration as to who really is asserting American foreign policy and who's projecting it. In fact, it's probably neither. It's probably Jared Kushner. But what we have to recognize, though, is that short of somebody bringing these things up at the level of the UN Security Council, nothing is really going to be binding enough to have happen. Aung San Suu Kyi is the one who, in fact, has resisted UN peacekeepers, UN observers, and UN humanitarian aid from reaching Rakhine. So basically what it'll take then is for the United Nations to put its full force behind whatever it can do to compel Burma to allow its forces to come in whatever capacity. Well, right now, I think the biggest obstacle to that in the UN Security Council is probably China. China seems to be on the side of the Burmese regime, and for reasons that are not really ethnically, religiously, or culturally driven. It really has to do with economics. So right now, there's a $3.6 billion hydroelectric power dam, the Myeotson Dam, which China is trying to assert. They don't want to then be seen as hostile or doing something that will antagonize the regime for going forward. I'm not even sure the Burmese need that kind of power supply, but the Chinese want to sell them the dam. So it's not a bad investment. And as I said before, that here at the mouth of the Irrawaddy or close by, the ability for China to have a port. Because if you notice, one of the things that China is doing is it is creating all of these deep water ports extending from the South China Sea, through the Indian Ocean, through the Bay of Bengal, through the Arabian Sea, all the way reaching East Africa. And so essentially what they're trying to do is become a two-ocean power. They've already invested heavily in the port city of Gwadar in Pakistan with a deep water port there, and so now they want to go ahead and create one on the eastern side of India, essentially suffocating India. And containing it, which is one of their grand strategies. As a result of it, they're all in with Burma. They're going to argue that Burma is in many ways a satellite or a client state for them, as the United States has client states, as the British, the French, and the Russians do, all members of, with permanent veto power seats on the UN Security Council. So that is what's really holding this up. Now, the U.S. could probably push China and say, we want your abstention on a resolution if it's just for humanitarian grounds. But I'm not sure that the United States wants to do that right now because they want to focus on other elements of their foreign policy that involve China, North Korea being one. And it seems as though this administration is allergic to the idea of juggling more than one ball at the same time. The other thing that has to be also taken into consideration when it comes to the UN Security Council and with the United States is that there simply is no incentive on economic or foreign policy reasons for the US to engage with either Burma or with Bangladesh. I mean, I know that that's just a terrible thing for people who are interested in humanitarian issues on moral and ethical grounds, but this is just the way that it works.
I have two questions, and maybe we won't get to both, but it was hard to assimilate all that history for me, and I feel badly about that, but it seems that the Rohingyans never had any sense of connectedness and self where they could fight for their own power. There was no chance for them to have a sense of power, and I mean, they had a sense of identity, but it was almost like being brought over on a slave ship where they're always, people are so prejudiced against them. Everywhere they were so, you know, they didn't have a chance in hell, so to speak. And now they're really in this horrible situation, but they never had a place that was really theirs or that they could identify as self. And the next question is, what do you think made the Burmese government decide to start this genocide? How does it help them, and what does it do for them?
Thank you. That's a two great question. I might take the first one, you take the second one. You know, the poverty, the innocent people, they have lots of downsides. And when a generation or a community or a society, you know, get oppressed by your same state, by your government, you really can do nothing. And when you organize against your state or your country or your administration, you are the one who become like, then they're going to tell you that, okay, these are the terrorist group. Even the same way they try to portray that the Burmese, or the Rakhine state, Rohingya, are the one who are attacking them. That was the first fold of the deception was portrayed to the world until just 3 months ago, when the Facebook and all this loaded with the information and the Citizen Journal, then people figure out, oh yes, it is a state-running operation. So actually, nothing could be done when the state or government come and really pick on somebody. Like we were not able to do anything in Darfur, in Libya. It's been going on in the world, but this is what came to our knowledge because of the social media and Facebook. We didn't see what happened in Darfur because we did not have Facebook or information like that. That's the same thing been repeating in the history, but now since we know it, we have a responsibility. The second question to you.
Thanks. I'm trying to think here. So on the issue about the Burmese and the Rohingya in Rakhine, the impetus is really economic. I mean, we're talking about a coastal region which is extremely valuable. As I mentioned before, I think for the Chinese, they see a lot of investment prospect there, and it is inconvenient for the Rohingya to be there as far as the Burmese government is concerned. And if you don't mind, I'd like to actually address the first question because I think it requires a little bit of a deeper dive. What you're finding is two almost competing forces happening. On the one hand, you asked very rightly, this is a people who've never really had a land of their own. But you're finding that in an era of increasing globalization, the question is always asked, does that even matter? Nation states seem to matter less now than they did perhaps 30, 40, 50 years ago because of globalization, because of all of these mass movements, because of corporations and how they move effortlessly from one area to the other. The other thing I think it's also important to recognize is that not only are the boundaries and the borders between these countries artificially imposed and created, they were created by people not of the people who are actually on the ground. They're not created by the indigenous people. But you also have, as a result of colonization, you have these massive movements of people. I think that the metaphor you used of the slave ship is so accurate. Think of a place like the Caribbean, where you have, there's places in the Caribbean you can go if you go on a cruise. You'll land on some island and you'll see signs that say Rams and Bulchans and Patels as these stores, or strange names which are melange names like Chandrapal and all. This is because of the forced movement of people from the Indian subcontinent to work in sugar plantations and other fields in British properties and territories in the Caribbean. Similarly, this is what happened in East Africa. Similarly, this is what happened in South Africa. Wherever the British wanted, they were simply going to move people as though these were pawns on a chessboard in order to then effectuate whatever were their policy objectives. And imagine just how disruptive and dislocating that is. Now, 4, 5, 10, 12 generations later, the offspring of this transaction, this is the only life they've known. They don't see themselves as necessarily being Indian. They see themselves as being Caribbean. I mean, people who are 5th generation in South Africa or in Kenya, for example, see themselves as Kenyan or Ugandan, except in 1974 when Idi Amin says, you know what, that's it, you're no longer African, get out. And so you find this mass purge of anybody of Indian ethnic origin or heritage from East Africa, from Uganda. And those who could leave were able to, who could leave and go westward, came to Canada, came to the United States, went to the UK. Those who didn't ended up back in India, and they were completely fish out of water. It was a country they didn't know. They had some kind of vestigial cultural connection to it. And in many ways, you find that the Rohingya were that. Not only were they sent in the 19th century over to Burma as laborers by the British, they were promised certain things. And then by 1947, a line was drawn in the ground to separate these two areas that were once part of British South Asia. That has nothing to do with the ability of the people to have any agency over their own lives. And we are now living with, this is why they call this the post-colonial era. We are seeing all of what that legacy is now providing.
The first one, I want to come back to what you asked and whether or not there are Rohingya singularly. I know that there's one meatiest case in the New York Times that was a couple of days ago where they focus on 100 families, whether or not they have emigrated to the United States, anywhere. So that's the first one. And the second one is, how were the 200,000 or so Rohingyas who were refugees before this crisis treated in Bangladesh? Were they marginalized in a camp, etc.? And is there the possibility, since there is no right of return, if I can use that term, anywhere, for them, is it possible that a state could be carved out, whether it be in the northeastern part of the Rakhine state, farther up where it joins with Bangladesh, or not, in terms of, is that the ability to create a state for the Rohingya?
The people went to Bangladesh, and the economic situation in Bangladesh is not that strong. The political situation is not also strong. It's very corruption, and the description he was bringing about one of the daughter and how the country is running, but that's kind of political position. But the country itself, in a big, huge, deep troubling. It's already a big mess. And there was a situation, it's called push back and push in. So Bangladesh and the government really, they don't want to take also the responsibility. I'm talking about the previous situation, that how we can take care of these people, yet we are not solvent ourselves. We cannot even take care of our own citizens. But with the midst of the current situation, somehow the Bangladesh government actually openly, widely, with a wide open arm, said, yes, if we eat a meal, we will share that meal to them. But that was the point of kind of humanitarian background. But is it feasible? And how that is, really equitable, or it is really, a true equation to solve? Bangladesh government really, at this point, are not in the situation that they can solve this whole, people and keep them and take them. The country, according to the size, if you look at the size of Michigan, 2/3 size of the Michigan, and it has 170 million people. See, the area of the country of Bangladesh is only 55,000 square miles. Yet, Michigan is like 74,000 square miles. And how many people we have in Michigan? 9 million. Bangladesh has 170 million. So the total situation is really beyond their capacity. However, they want to take care of it, but without the international intervention, it cannot be done. But Bangladesh government previously with the 200,000, whatever happened within the last 10, 20 years of the in and out, they never accepted them as also a Bangladeshi citizen. So that's the crisis for them.
Regarding the question about if any of the Rohingya have made it to the United States, I'm not sure in the current wave, because it would require them to actually file for refugee status or seek asylum, and they may simply lack even the very basic paperwork for that to occur. It takes a minimum of 18 to 24 months of vetting, including a dozen federal agencies, 6 international agencies. So the process itself just simply may be too daunting for people who had to leave Rakhine in the way that they did. Regarding the Bangladesh, the Rohingya who moved to Bangladesh, perhaps in an earlier time they may have achieved nationality or citizenship. That doesn't seem to be the case with the current thing. But what you were proposing regarding creating a state for them, wow. So the last 2 states that were created from other states were South Sudan and Timor-Leste. People don't really care much about Sudan regarding anyone wanting to patronize Sudan or consider it to be one of their beneficiaries. Neither in the case of Indonesia. In the case of Burma, because of the relationship that it has with China, it's very unlikely that China would ever agree to seeing the carving out of a state and giving it any extra sovereignty for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of its economic ties there. Number two, they don't want then the Uyghur people of Xinjiang to make a similar suit for sovereignty. They have their own issues with an ethnic group that they want to go ahead and marginalize and subjugate. That's why they keep moving more and more of the ethnic Hans into Xinjiang. The other issue, though, is, and I suppose this is a bit more philosophical, is that should we, given the really odious track record of nation and state building and carving, be in the business of doing it again? It may be a solution of some sort, but I just don't think that it has been very successful as a model when Western nations in particular come in and decide that they're going to move the goalposts around or move the borders and the boundaries around, even with noble intent that they may have. It seems like it's always wrought with peril. That clearly is what got us into the situation in the first place, where we have a scenario like the Rohingya, and I'm not sure that 2 wrongs are going to necessarily result in a right.
The citizenship process, as Dr. Saeed was saying, so far, my knowledge, and we've been through, there are a lot of people there, on the ground, and, there is zero, immigration process, zero. And, what I'm talking about here is, this is a mass, execution. So they were trying to, run away from just this brutal military attack. So they were actually taking and trying to save their life. Meanwhile, like, thousands of them, they lost their life, but there is no, evidence of any immigration process that taken place to bring them to the United States of America as of today.
Actually, they don't have any official documentation from the Burmese government that they exist.
Right.
I understand. It's the Bangladesh, in terms of the last agreement.
Yeah.
Bangladesh is interested in having these folks return to the Rocky state.
Right, that's what Bangladesh is.
And that's where they can hold the paradox that the more citizenship they give, the Rohingya, the less incentive the Burmese have to take them back, saying, well, why should we take them back? They're already Bangladeshi citizens. Yeah.
Right.
So we have obviously an ongoing discussion. We're all standing and ready to keep talking. But once again, let's please give a nice thank you to MD alum and Nayeem Choudhury for organizing that half. And my favorite professor at Wayne State University, Saeed Khan. Please leave a donation if you can. All extra money will go to the Stop Brain Genocide Group. And now that we all know a little bit more about each other, that's what OneHamtramck's all about. See you at a Bangladesh restaurant in Hamtramck here. We've got about 4 or 5 good ones. And now when you go there, you can ask some new questions, like who killed Rahman in 1975? Where was the U.S. in support of Pakistan instead of Bangladesh when it was formed? And all those sort of questions. You got some more ideas. So keep the discussion going, and there's a lot more to talk about, a lot more to learn. And please join us at our next forum on December 10th when we talk about the Bangladesh Mural Project. Thank you for being here.